We're standing about 60k north of Daylesford on the edge of the Loddon River. This was the site of the Neereman Aboriginal Protectorate, which started here in October 1840.
From all accounts, it was a rich countryside, and as I look out now, I can see nice brown fields and that brown dirt. And this is the site of the Neereman Aboriginal Protectorate. From what we can gather, Neereman, or Neereman, sort of means to hide here or feel safe here, or as we found a bit recently, possibly high banks here. So Djaara, this probably would be a traditional camp in place.
One of the things when you mentioned the big old trees, there was also big old fish. There was Murray cod that might have been as big as 60 kilograms right here in this river. There were Macquarie perch, maybe 20 kilograms.
This does show how rich this was in food resources. When they moved over to Mount Franklin, they took a ton of dried fish with them out of this river.
Yep.
So that's amazing.
Yep.
That's a lot of fish, for dried fish,
yep,
to make up around a ton.
Yeah.
So she was rich, really rich in obviously water, food. There'll be water birds and that as well, and ducks and things, and eggs, and animals that would come down here to drink. This would have been idyllic.
Yep.
We know that there was grasslands. It wasn't just all wooded country. There was open grasslands. And Robertson talks about coming over Coranderrk or Smeaton Hill. The fields down the bottom were yellow. Not as far as the eye could see, but for a long way. There was red gum forests there, but there was also open fields. And from what we can gather, lots of those open fields were, like he says, yellow, with the yam daisy or the murnong daisy, which was good tucker. Robinson says when he got down to the flat land, there was between 20 and 40 women digging up the yams.
Yep. And he talks about the places they cooked them, which we now know were in a huge concentration on the Smeaton Plain all around Coranderrk. So there were hundreds of people on that plain when John Hepburn unsettled that country. But
we know lots of people carried mortar and pestle with them, portable tools. But we found permanent ones as well in rocky outcrops or little outcrops of ground near the rivers, and big, I think they're sandstone rocks with grinding grooves in them. They would have been not permanent, but people would have kept coming back there.
Yep.
Every year and possibly a couple of times a year. So we know people moved around, but they also had places they kept coming back to.
Yeah. As a Djaara man yourself and an elder, why do you think the Protectorate failed?
Well, in a nutshell, they were unsettled. Yeah, and then they were forced to go to other places. And, we know they didn't like going to other people's areas without various protocols taking place. They were nervous and unsettled, and that getting moved around the countryside without participating in the various protocols. I read of one instance where an Aboriginal guide was so nervous of crossing the country around Port Phillip and down to the southwest district that they put him on a boat from Melbourne to either Geelong or Portland to avoid crossing them other mobs' country. People, we know that they went to the stations or protectorates for a short time, a little while. They camped there for X amount of weeks or maybe a month or two, but then they'd take off again and go and practice, their traditional. The two cultures struggled from the get-go. Aboriginal people thought, the white people in the beginning thought they were returned ancestors, spirits
Yep.
who died and come back.
And all of these interesting and important sites lack acknowledgement, protection, and interpretation. When we go to Franklin Ford, the only signs that are there are ones that were put there in the 1960s and 70s. Wouldn't you reckon we can do better than that?
You would reckon that, yes. But places like Franklin Ford and that, where we've got the school roads that come through it, it's a lot easier to get to.
Like we're sitting by this huge river red gum tree, hundreds of years old, but the plains around here would have been quite different. In the background here we've got these bull oak trees that are falling down into the river. Some of them are pretty old too. We know that we have banksia, a tree violet, kangaroo grass. Country around Daylesford and Castlemaine that's forest now was actually forest then.
Well, the soil, would have been really rich in them open grasslands, particularly food resources available, because the women would dig the tubers up. Tubers be like carrots and potatoes grow under the ground. The soil was toiled and burnt, so it fertilised with ash and stuff, and we know there's some plants and seeds need heat and fire to germinate, so all that worked in together.
Yep.
You can spear your hand into the dirt and it'll go up past your wrist.
It was so friable. Yep. So it was rich country.
Rich country.
I just think when we sit here on this riverbank and think about what was happening here 183 years ago, and yet people have forgotten that this even existed.
And the Aboriginal people, I think, would have utilised Mount Franklin or Franklin Ford as a place to come and rest.
Yep.
They called it a place to sit down.
Yep.
So they probably would have went off, done their traditional stuff, and come back and had a bit of a rest.
So we know, Rick, that this became a place of death and sickness, and that people were dying here for a whole range of things. What do we know about how people stayed healthy before unsettling happened?
Besides bush tucker and the resources the land gave to us, we also had medicine plants. I'm pretty sure it's a eucalypt you can rub on your arm if you get mosquito bite.
Yep.
Eucalypt smell and that takes it away or helps with the sting. We know that there was a bark that people would crush and throw it into the river and it would take the oxygen out the water for a small time.
And catch the fish.
And catch the fish. The fish would basically drown and float to the top. There's probably just not much they didn't have a use for.
Yep.
Even the vert on the back of the gum trees. That was high in protein and edible. Yeah. So that 60,000 years of living, there's not much they don't utilise.
Yeah. We're standing looking down on the former Aboriginal station site. This is where the Aboriginal Protectorate was here at Franklin Ford between 1841. It was closed in Christmas of 1849. In the 1840s, down on the flat down here in the middle of the paddock, there's a whole heap of buildings, mainly made of bark. There was a protector's house, there was a store, there was a chapel, there was a medical office. There was a whole lot of people living on the flat down there. Where we've just been, they were taken from Neereman and brought here, and they started all over again in basically June of 1841.
They said this was another one of their favourite traditional camping places.
Yeah.
They were both traditional campsites, from what we can gather.
We know a fair bit about the people that were taken from here too. So this is really personal stuff.
Yeah.
It's about people. And when they got to Coranderrk, they took photos, the ones that are in this exhibition here at the Daylesford Museum.
Yeah.
And how do you feel when you see them? What do you see in these people's eyes?
You can see pain in the people's eyes. And, you know, lots of their family have been killed and that, and died by European sicknesses by this time as well.
Yep.
The smallpox thing came through. You know, I think by this time they're starting to realise the fight is almost hopeless. They're fighting guns, you know. As we know, the spear's not much good against a gun. So they were fighting a losing battle. Then the squatters came, and then the gold diggers came. You know, they had protocols on things they could do, and going through other mobs' country, being gathered up and taken away from your home country through other people's countries, and luckily, in some cases, we're friends with the Kulin nation. You know, we know a guy called Gurukam, or Harry Nelson was his name. He arranged marriages with Barak's clan.
And that was your family?
That was part of our family, yeah.
Yep.
So we had good relations with them as well, so it probably wasn't quite as hard being moved down to Coranderrk. And, you know, I think the Aboriginal people, particularly of, you know, northwest central Victoria, are actually stronger. Stronger as in fighting for cultural history to be learnt and taught, and you know, we're doing things with the government. We've got an agreement with the government. Well, I think we're united as well these days.
Yeah. What do you think you'd like people to learn from looking into these portraits that are here in this museum?
That there is a whole nother life and existence out there to be learned. I find that not many people know much of this history. And just to touch back on the people in that, Barry, that after the initial contact in the land grab or to update, but the protectorate system tried to hold down the protectorate stations.
Yes.
You know, Coranderrk had a big fight with the government, just trying to keep that place open and going and running. So after their gold-winning hops that they grew, they still had a fight just to survive.
Yep.
You know, they're quite adaptable and that peoples to keep going on. You know, a lot of people would give up.
Yep.
So here we are now in the crater of Mount Franklin, a little ways up from the Franklin Ford Protectorate Station. And, you know, despite the efforts from the explorers and the squatters, the gold seekers, and after that more so land was taken up, and governments and government departments trying to hold the Aboriginal people down in lots of different ways. You could call it a time when we basically lost our voice and lost our language. We know we lost big parts of language. But today, like I was saying before, we're feeling stronger and more of us and that today in the community. And we're also doing things like dual naming places. This is Mount Franklin, named probably after John Franklin, or Franklin, who passed through here. Franklin Ford is where Franklin forded the creek. And we've got the Djaara name as well, Lalgambuk. So we're we're getting a bit of our voice back. We're getting a bit of our language back. We're getting lots of language back. And it's great to see that we're dual naming and changing some of the names of some of these areas, some of the creeks, some of the mountains and hills. Again, your names changed and dual named back into Djaara language. So that's another important step forward for our culture and for rewriting history a bit, if you like. So, yeah, thanks for having us, and I hope you enjoy the exhibition.